Doing that was a kind of amazing moment in my life. I mean, when you're there, it's kind
That was a sort of magical time in my life doing that. I mean, it's like a dream when you're there. It's those incredible beaches, that incredible
of like a dream. Is that amazing life? Those amazing beaches? On television, St. Marie appears to be the easiest job. Rum at dusk, warm sand, blue ocean, and a case neatly solved before the credits roll. However, Utopia soon turns into a trap for every detective who shows up. There, Richard passed away. Humphrey ran away out of love. Jack departed before his sorrow was consumed by the island. At last, Neville made the decision to live fearlessly. Why they depart is not the mystery. That's why each of them is altered by the island. The Paradise Trap comes first. Viewers have always been sold a fantasy by Death in Paradise. A little Caribbean island, a lovely police station, a new killing every week, a British detective who looks utterly mismatched to the climate, a local group that truly knows the area. Until the investigator collects everyone in a room and explains precisely what everyone missed, the riddle appears to be unsolvable. It's one of the most reassuring TV formulas. And the reason the departures seem so weird is precisely because of that comfort. The majority of detective series safeguard their lead. The brand is the detective. People come back because of the detective. Columbo, Morse, Vera, Hugo, and Sherlock Holmes. A mystery series typically sticks around once it finds its main character. In Paradise, Death had the opposite effect. Replacing the individual in the middle was the foundation of a successful show. After 2 series, Ben Miller departed as Richard P. Chris Marshall showed up as Humphrey Goodman and eventually departed as well. After assuming the role of Jack Mooney, Ardal O'Hanlon left. Ralph Little became Neville Parker, and he was the longest-serving detective in history. Even yet, he eventually moved on from St. Marie. Don Jalali showed up as Vin Wilson, demonstrating that the machine was still operational. The show ought to have been ruined by that. However, in some way, it turned into the show's secret weapon. Death in Paradise is more than merely a murder mystery series, which is the true twist. It's a ceremony of replacement. The island reveals a weakness in each detective. Richard is too inflexible. Humphrey is too disorganized. Jack is in mourning. Nearly everything terrifies Neville. Vin is emotionally distant, irritable, and defensive when he comes. They are not just given cases by St. Marie. It compels them to interact with the one thing they are trying to avoid. They depart for this reason, not because there is no loyalty in the program, because the voyage of the investigator is designed to come to an end. Every detective is a fish out of sea when they come. The island then gradually teaches him how to breathe. He is no longer a part of the same narrative after that. The formula won't work if the program doesn't release him. The man Paradise had to murder was Richard P. Richard P. detested Paradise, which made him the ideal first detective. That the humor was that. Wearing a complete suit, he arrived from Britain with the demeanor of a man who considered discomfort to be an insult. He was troubled by the heat, the sand, the food, the informality, and even the island's beauty, which appeared to anger him because it didn't act like London. However, Richard was very intelligent. He worked because of that equilibrium. In every setting the show put him in, he was physically inappropriate, emotionally guarded, and socially awkward. He could, however, see through pandemonium with almost surgical precision when it came to killing. Despite his misery on St. Marie, he was just the right kind of thinker the island needed. The early show was shaped by Ben Miller's performance. There was no overt sign that Richard was kind and endearing. He was prickly, formal, obstinate, and frequently unintentionally unpleasant. However, loneliness lay beneath that. Since relaxing meant relinquishing control, he had no idea how to do it. He didn't know how to blend in because doing so involved taking emotional risks. Both his punishment and his remedy came from St. Marie. Viewers saw him soften nearly against his will over the course of 2 series. He started to comprehend the group. He started to believe Camille. He started to realize that the island wasn't just irritating or ineffective. It had its own community, its own logic, and its own cadence. Richard did not become an island man who loved the beach. However, he began to change enough that supporters began to question what may happen if he continued. Ben Miller departed due to family matters. His personal life changed in a way that made it hard for him to stay while the production spent months filming in Guadeloupe, far from home. The reality was far more difficult for a show that appeared to viewers to be a dream job. On cinema, Paradise meant months away from family, grueling shoots, heat, and separation. However, the authors had an issue with narrative. How should Richard Poole be written? He can't just decide he likes the island and walk away. Fans would keep questioning why he didn't come back, so you can't just send him back to London. You can't act as though the man who detested St. Marie suddenly came to terms with it and left without feeling any emotional burden. Thus, the most surprising act that could be done was done by the show. He was slain by it. In the first episode of Series 3, Richard P. was slain with an ice pick. It was a cruel decision for a cozy mystery show. The crime-solving detective turned into the murderer. The body on the ground was the man who had always explained the crime. And that choice accomplished two things simultaneously. Fans were heartbroken, but the show was saved. Because Death in Paradise made one thing very evident by killing Richard. There was no untouchable detective. The island was more than just a lovely place to work. Stories could come to an end there. The show was able to redefine itself because to just one decision. The next detective would constantly be plagued by Richard's existence, thus he had to die. He still does, in a sense. He has been measured against every detective who has come after him. The deadpan annoyance, the stiffness, the outfit, and the unachievable standards. Richard turned into the first ghost of St. Marie, the guy from whom all replacements' music had to flee. The detective who discovered a heart was Humphrey Goodman. Of all the detectives on Death in Paradise, Humphrey Goodman had the most difficult task. He had to show up right away following Richard Poole's passing and persuade supporters not to despise him. That task is a nightmare. The first lead had just been lost by viewers. They were upset with the writers, grieving Richard, and wary of anyone who may succeed him. Humphrey would have felt like a cheap imitation if he had been too similar. He might have ruined the show he had been to different. Thus, he was portrayed as the contrary by the authors. Richard was inflexible. Humphrey was disorganized. Richard's emotions were closed off. Humphrey was excruciatingly transparent. Richard appeared to be waiting for an apology after being unintentionally tossed into the Caribbean. Humphrey had the appearance of someone who may unintentionally stumble onto a crime scene, offer an apology to the dead, and still crack the case ahead of everyone else. Chris Marshall made the part feel cozy. Humphrey felt uncomfortable, but not icy. He was awkward, nervous, compassionate, and strangely intelligent. His mind was working at full speed. Even though he appeared disorganized, he was able to piece together every hint in the end. He was the first significant evidence that Death in Paradise might withstand a change in lead. However, Humphrey's departure also exposes one of the most important aspects of the program. The characters are also challenged by the island, in addition to the actors. After a period of emotional turmoil, Humphrey arrived. His marriage was not working out. His self-assurance was shaken. His life had fallen apart. He restored himself at St. Marie by work, relationships, and the gradual realization that he might fit in somewhere unexpected rather than through lofty therapy talks. He appeared to be more suited to heaven than Richard had ever been for a while. He was fond of the people. The island appealed to him. He relished the warmth. He developed genuine affection for the squad. However, his story's emotional appeal extended beyond his ability to blend in with St. Marie. Finding out what kind of life he truly desired was the goal. Additionally, Marshall's departure altered the franchise in a way that nobody could have imagined. Years later, Humphrey made a comeback in the English-set spin-off Beyond Paradise, which was subtly great because it demonstrated something significant. It is possible for an investigator to leave St. Marie without losing viewers. After Humphrey departed the island, his story continued. It grew. His departure differs from Richard's because of this. Richard's departure represented closure via demise. Humphrey's was possibility-based closure. To keep the farce going, one investigator has to be fired, Another departed because the character had discovered something worthwhile, which gave the show its second survival tip. A tragic conclusion is not necessary for every detective. Some people just outgrow paradise. The man who departed before grief solidified was Jack Mooney. Jack Mooney showed up with a different type of melancholy. He first came across as laid-back, amiable, chatty, and cozy. He had the ability to calm suspicions before they realized he had already taken note of everything. In contrast to Humphrey's disarray and Richard's rigidity, Jack felt more at ease, more fatherly, and more emotionally accessible. However, Jack was hiding something weighty behind his lightness. He was a widower. Everything about him was formed by that particular aspect. He arrived as a bereaved person. Warmth, entertainment, employment, and a new community were all provided by the island. After sadness had appended his life, it allowed him to breathe. Because fans were familiar with Ardalo Hanlon from comedies, particularly Father Ted, he gave a very particular energy to Jack without making Jack look foolish. The show may benefit from that warmth and timing. He was kind but not weak, humorous but not stupid. He solved problems by paying close attention, engaging in discussion with others, and allowing them to misjudge him. His interpretation of the detective focused more on emotional healing than on being uncomfortable on the island. His departure is therefore frequently underestimated. Jack detested St. Marie, so he stayed. Despite his inability to perform the job, he stayed. He performed his work well. He was buddies. Compared to Humphrey, he had adapted to the island less chaotically and more successfully than Richard. However, that was precisely the risk. St. Marie might have developed into a lovely waiting area where Jack felt at ease enough to stay put. He left after realizing he had to go back to his life rather than merely get by in a new one. After re-establishing his belief that scenery alone cannot alleviate sadness, he departed. Paradise is a place where you may heal, but you cannot stay there indefinitely. Ardalo Hanlon stated behind closed doors that it was time to move on. This is significant since it nearly completely suits the character. Jack's arc has come to a conclusion. The reason he was there in the first place would have been lessened if he had been kept longer. One of the most astute things Death in Paradise is aware of is this: before the audience grows resentful of a detective, he should depart. Although that may sound harsh, that is the reality. By design, the format is repeated. Killing suspects, hints, humorous situations with fish out of water, and the big reveal. That pattern gains fresh emotional depth from the primary investigator. The show runs the risk of becoming boring once the texture gets too familiar. Jack's departure shielded his persona from that. He came in mourning. He departed prepared to resume his life. And the island had fulfilled its purpose once more. The detective who remained long enough to transform was Neville Parker. On St. Marie, Neville Parker was practically designed to suffer. He has allergies to everything, fearful of everything, uncomfortable with food, weather, heat, insects, uncertainty, and social danger. Neville's body seemed to totally reject paradise. If Richard P. didn't enjoy it, that might have been intolerable. Rather, it developed into one of the show's most enduring emotional arcs. Neville, played by Ralph Little, entered Death in Paradise during a trying time. The lead in the program had previously been replaced several times. Fans were aware of the trend. A new investigator arrives, appears uneasy, solves crimes, wins over the audience, and then departs. There was a risk that viewers would cease making investments. Neville underwent a more thorough metamorphosis as a result of the episode. He didn't just learn to put up with St. Marie, he gradually came to accept life. Neville's fears were more than jokes. They shaped his personality. He was a man whose world was diminished by his fears. He was pushed in the opposite direction by St. Marie. He was exposed to new foods, people, emotional dangers, friendships, heartbreaks, and an uncontrollable environment. Neville wanted to go for a long time. Then something altered. He created a life. He grew close to the group. Florence captured his heart. He was not perfect. He was injured. He didn't become braver suddenly. He was still uncomfortable and nervous. However, those things no longer controlled him at all. His final departure following Series 13 seemed justified because of this. Neville was defeated by Paradise, yet he stayed. Paradise had at last taught him how to make decisions, so he departed. The romantic possibility the program had hinted at for years was made possible by his breakup with Florence. Some admirers felt that song was long overdue. Others thought it was too tidy, but on an emotional level, it made sense. Opening himself to a life that scared him had been the focus of Neville's entire quest. It wasn't running away to leave St. Marie with Florence. It was the first really audacious thing he had done for himself. Ralph Little's departure was also a significant event for the series behind the scenes. He was now the lead detective with the longest tenure. Viewers had spent more time with Neville than any other did by the time he departed. Replacing him was particularly dangerous because of this. However, Death in Paradise had prepared its viewers for this. Music it had made tradition out of replacement. Neville's leave was clever since it didn't feel like another reset for the purpose of a reset. It was the culmination of a protracted emotional experiment. Is it possible for the most inappropriate man on the island to get the courage to leave it on his own terms? Yes was the response. Neville's chapter is crucial because of this. Richard demonstrated that the program could withstand shock. Humphrey demonstrated that it could withstand heating. Jack demonstrated that it could endure adulthood. Neville demonstrated that it could endure long-term emotional development. Every detective did more than just solve murders. They all taught a new trick to the format. Vin Wilson, the new test. Next was Vin Wilson. The addition of Don Gile as the new detective was more than just a casting change. Death in Paradise was now conscious of its own pattern. The arrival of a new D no longer surprised viewers. They anticipated it. The show's ability to make the fifth lead feel essential rather than automatic was the question. That challenge is more difficult than it seems. The initial substitution is striking. The idea is demonstrated by the second. The tone is revitalized in the third. The fourth turns into a protracted emotional commitment. The audience can begin to glimpse the machinery by the fifth. Another British detective comes. One more conflict with island life. Another dynamic in a police station. One more round of suspects. One more final farewell. Vin had to introduce an alternative form of friction as a result. Vin shows up defensively, whereas Richard was stiff. Humphrey was disorganized, Jack was warm, and Neville was nervous. He is wiser, more cautious, and less immediately enchanted by St. Marie. On vacation, he does not unintentionally feel like a guy. He feels like he's bringing personal burdens into an environment that requires transparency. The new era has potential because of this. St. Marie usually has two cases going on at once because Death in Paradise works best when the detective is not just investigating crimes, but is also being covertly investigated by the island, the detective's own emotional enigma, and the demise of the weak. The question of what Vin is defending rises. That is the new version of the formula. Not awkwardness, not stiff English, not allergies, not grief in the same form, but resistance. A man who refuses to be softened, situated in a community that almost coerces people toward becoming softer. It also matters who is currently surrounding him. Selwyn Patterson, the commissioner of Don Warrington, continues to be one of the show's greatest anchors. St. Marie's emotional coherence is provided by Elizabeth Burgene's Catherine. Every foreign detective must understand the local rhythm, which is provided by the supporting police squad. The show continues to exist because of this. The investigator shifts. The island recalls. The balance is that the program would fall apart if everything changed at once. However, the principal detective can switch roles without leaving viewers feeling totally disoriented because St. Marie keeps familiar locations, familiar faces, familiar rituals, and familiar regulations. One man is not being replaced by Vin. He's going into a ritual, asterisk, and if the trend continues, he will eventually encounter the identical query that every detective encounters. Does St. Marie teach you how to leave, or does it become your home? The true reason they keep leaving. What is the reason behind each detective's constant departure from the island? Practicality is the obvious solution. Death in Paradise is more difficult to film than it seems. Although the program may appear to be a working holiday, it actually takes months of time away from home in Guadeloupe, where there is intense heat, humidity, and a rigorous production schedule. It becomes challenging for actors who have families in the UK or Ireland. Staying in a popular part for too long might feel dangerous for actors who wish to pursue other creative options. That clarifies a lot. Ben Miller quit because the commitment was too difficult due to his family life. Chris Marshall departed because he could no longer bear to be apart from his kids. Asterisk, it was time for Ardell Hanlon to move on. After Neville's narrative reached its poignant conclusion, Ralph Little finished the longest detective music run and departed. However, the most profound solution is imaginative. In Paradise, suffering is the foundation of death. Arriving from somewhere else, a detective finds it difficult to fit in. Comedy is produced by that unease. Conflict results from it. It enables the outsider to learn from the local team. It also provides a personal storyline for the investigator. St. Marie gradually reveals the wounds, flaws, or rigidities that accompany each new D. The premise begins to falter as the detective gets too at ease. Richard's resistance to the island made him humorous. Humphrey had rebuilt himself there, so he was relocating. Jack was healing there, which is why he was compassionate. Make a decision if any of them remained indefinitely. Either cease their development or make them someone who doesn't match the fish out of water concept anymore. The trap is that the detective needs to adapt, but he must go if he makes too many changes. Because of this, the cast rotation in the show is not a weakness. It's a valve for pressure. New chemistry, new romantic potential, new detective, new defect, new comedic rhythm, and new emotional dilemma. The lead maintains the emotional machinery while the crimes remain familiar. The majority of shows worry about the main character being replaced. It is essential to Death in Paradise. The true protagonist is the island. This is the main reason the show endures each departure. The true protagonist is not the detective. Because the detective receives the major revelation, the last explanation, and the headline casting, St. Marie may seem odd. However, viewers go back to the island, the beach home, the police station, Catherine's bar, the commissioner's power, the community's beat, the suspects who arrive with secrets, the crime sites in the sunlight, and the last room reveal. The guest is the detective. The constant is the island. Because of this, Death in Paradise's lead can be replaced more readily than in other detective series. Oxford feels different once Moore stops. The entire world of the program comes to an end with Poole. However, the island is still prepared for the next bewildered British officer to get off the plane after a Death in Paradise detective departs. It is nearly legendary. St. Marie is both a test and a paradise. In music puts conceit to the test. It puts grief to the test. It puts loneliness to the test. It puts fear to the test. Emotional avoidance is tested. The detective's life is the concealed interior riddle. The crimes are the exterior puzzles. When a lead shows up, they all believe they are there to solve crimes. In reality, he needs to solve his own problems. Because of this, the show feels more comfortable than disposable. The recipe is well known, yet it gains vitality from the emotional reset. You can watch for the deadly puzzle, the scenery, the comedy, or the returning characters, but underneath the program is quietly posing a much more human question. When you are removed from the life you know, what type of person are you? In response, Richard resisted until his memory of death froze him. In response, Humphrey said, "Love home." In response, Jack acknowledged that grief could not constitute his entire existence. In response, Neville opted for bravery over security. Vin continues to respond. No single actor is as powerful as that structure. And that's the reason the show continues. Why music is also abandoned by the supporting cast. There are other people who depart besides the detectives. Numerous cherished supporting characters have also departed from Death in Paradise. Camille, Ruby, Florence, Maron, Darlene, Dwayne, Fidel, JP, and more. Some depart in search of new employment. Some depart to visit relatives. Some reappear later, while others vanish into the larger St. Marie recollection of the show. These exits are important because they serve as a reminder that the island is constantly changing. All it feels like is static. Change is necessary for a cozy show, but not too much. If the complete cast lasted forever, the planet could feel frozen. The audience would lose the emotional center if everyone departed at once. Death has managed to survive in Paradise by gently rotating. One huge farewell here, a new officer there, and a favorite coming back at the perfect time. Camille's departure for Paris provided her growth and ambition. He now had a future with his family thanks to JP's departure. For Neville in particular, Florence's rivals and departures raised the emotional stakes. Because Dwayne embodied so much of the early local charm of the show, his departure was painful. Selwyn's staying matters because he gives the series continuity no detective can deliver. The other secret is this: even when the detectives go, the act never gives the spectator a sense of total abandonment. There's always someone who remembers. Selwyn Patterson, Don Warrington's commissioner, became crucial because of this. Every era has been witnessed by him. He has witnessed Richard's rival, Humphrey's replacement, Jack's adjustment, Neville's struggle, Vin's takeover, and the island's transformation. He provides institutional memory for the program. The characters that survive become invaluable in a series that revolves around exits. They serve as evidence that St. Marie is more than a setting. It's a community. How the program became a franchise. The most bizarre aspect is that a universe was eventually generated by the departures. After Humphrey departed St. Marie, Beyond Paradise followed him to an entirely other location years later. The emotional DNA was still there, but the Caribbean was gone. A slightly weird investigator, a neighborhood full of secrets, cases that combine warmth and darkness, and a lead character still attempting to create a life. That spin-off was a big success. Death in Paradise was no longer merely a performance. It had a travel-friendly format. The brand was then expanded once more with Return to Paradise. What started off as a single imaginary island murder program grew into a more expansive cozy crime universe. A detective visiting a neighborhood where the riddle of the week is only half the story is the central theme of all of them. Because of this, the detective exits from the original series now appear more like a template than a problem. The franchise learns how to maneuver with every exit. A detective can depart without destroying the affection of the audience. There are other places where a character can start over. The tone endures even when the locale shifts. If the emotional core is always changing, a formula may repeat. That is Death in Paradise's true genius. Although it appears straightforward, maintaining simplicity throughout 15 series is challenging. The crimes can't be too serious. The humor must not be overly absurd. The crime cannot be absorbed by the romance. The lead cannot remain too long or depart too quickly. The island must feel familiar, but not dead. The show consistently renews itself because of this equilibrium. Critics can refer to it as predictable. Supporters refer to it as dependable. Furthermore, dependability might have a greater impact on television than prestige music. What the detectives actually leave behind. On St. Marie, every detective leaves a trace. Richard departs from the initial set of rules. The show music can go on even if the detective dies. Emotional warmth is left by Humphrey. A person can be healed by the island without becoming permanently owned. Jack departs from maturity. Grief does not have a permanent hiding spot, but it can find breathing room. Neville departs with bravery. It is possible for the most terrified guy on the island to get the courage to venture into the unknown. Whatever comes next, Vin will make his imprint. For this reason, the history of the play is not erased by the exits. They construct it. When a new investigator enters, the audience carries all the previous ones with them. Fans contrast approaches. They contrast awkward behaviors. They contrast last farewells, beach home routines, favorite officers, and romances. The spinning has become part of the pleasure. Everybody has a favorite investigator. Additionally, every new detective begins music at a disadvantage because everyone has a favorite. This is another factor contributing to the role's difficulty. The actor is doing more than just portraying a role. He's entering a debate that started years ago. Fans of Richard desire sharpness. Warmth is what Humphrey fans desire. Ease is what Jack fans desire. Vulnerability is what Neville fans desire. In addition to meeting the format requirements, the new investigator must demonstrate that he is not just another iteration of the previous one. There must be a great deal of pressure. Once more, it clarifies why actors leave the industry after a while. Filming in Paradise is not the only aspect of the job. It is being evaluated against every detective in front of you while holding a cherished formula. It's a bulky luggage to go to the beach. The final answer. What is the reason behind each detective's constant departure from the island? Because the foundation of Death in Paradise is a lovely contradiction. The audience wants Saint Marie to remain unchanged. The detective in the program needs to change. The cycle is created by that paradox. Uncomfortable, lonely, mourning, embarrassed, scared, or emotionally closed, a new detective shows up. He is pushed by the island. He is softened by the team. He is exposed by the cases. He receives something from the community that he was unaware he needed. He must then depart when he is at last complete enough to fit in. It's not a bad piece of writing. The hidden structure is that, for the audience, the island is utopia as we may spend an hour there and then return home. Work, heat, grief, murder, loneliness, love, and self-discovery are what the investigators consider to be paradise. The island is not intended to be a destination, therefore they cannot remain there indefinitely. It is supposed to be a pivotal moment. Although each Death in Paradise detective departs for a different cause, the pattern remains the same. They are exposed, altered, and then sent on by Saint Marie. Please comment on which detective exit most affected you. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Humphrey, Jack, Neville, Richard, or the next person in line.